Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, as-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We'll carry on today. We are on the section of abrogation, and we have already been through the different types, or we listed the types of abrogation. Now we're going through how abrogation takes place, and we're on page 49 of the book. So we'll go through the main types of how abrogation takes place and some examples of that. The first is abrogation of the Quran with Quran, and we give two examples here. So the example of giving sadaqah before the private consultation with Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was initially an order for the companions that they had to do that, and then later on that was abrogated. Similarly, the 1 year iddah period for the woman had been changed later on to 4 months and 10 days. So we go through the two verses here in terms of the ayat abrogating the hukm of previously revealed ayah. So here the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, and those of you who die and leave behind wives should bequeath for their wives a year's maintenance and residence without turning them out. But if their wives leave, there is no sin on you for that which they do of themselves, provided it is honorable. So here it's talking about 1 year of the period of iddah. So the wife could not marry during that period. And then again in Surah Al-Baqarah, in the same surah, so that is verse 240. Then later on actually in an earlier ayah, in verse 234. So this shows you what we discussed earlier, that the ayat were revealed in different periods, but they are, then the Prophet ﷺ used to tell the companions where to place them within the surah. So here, and those of you who die and leave wives behind, they, the wives, shall wait as regards to their marriage for 4 months and 10 days. So this is the period specified for the widow. So this is a clear example of that. The example of the sadaqah, we have already given the verse earlier, so we have not mentioned it again. So this is a common type in terms of when we're talking about the ayat of Quran. Then we also have abrogation of the sunnah by the sunnah. So here we're going to go into some details that this is when one mutawatir abrogates another mutawatir, and an ahad singular narration is abrogated by mutawatir, or an ahad is abrogated by another ahad narration. So here they are in the hadith, there is slight difference, because of course the Quran, all of it is definitive, it's qat'i riwayah. So therefore the Quran abrogates Quran. Now we're talking about the sunnah abrogating sunnah. Now here there are differences because there's different levels of authenticity in the sunnah. So we have discussed that earlier. So mutawatir, which means the definitive narration, can abrogate another mutawatir hadith, or a mutawatir can abrogate ahad hadith, but the ahad cannot abrogate mutawatir, because ahad by definition is less strong in authenticity, is not definite. So dhanni cannot abrogate qat'i, because qat'i by definition is definite. So this sometimes people assume that in Usul ul-Fiqh there is no role of the mind whatsoever. That is wrong. Actually the mind is not used as a source for legislation, but it's to understand, okay, and to understand the ahkam sharia, and to understand the principle. So here of course we can see that the scholars, when they talk about ilm al-hadith, it is a type of epistemology, what they call the science of the truth, coming to the truth, coming to what is definitive. So when they decided these principles, those principles can be understood by the mind, that how can something definite as a narration be abrogated by something which is indefinite? It doesn't make sense. Okay? And similarly, it does make sense if something is definite at one point, and then later on, like the Quran, is definite, and another ayah is also definite, and it abrogates. So that is clear. Of course, khabar ahad is dhanni, and therefore it can be abrogated by a definite hadith. So those are the, let's say, some points regarding the sunnah. Then we give some examples of abrogation in the Sunnah, some of the famous ones, like the ahadith, I used to forbid you from visiting graves, now you should visit them. So meaning it's permitted. In the earlier period, it was the Prophet ﷺ forbade that. Also, regarding the punishment of the one who drinks alcohol, if he drinks the fourth time, after being punished each time, that's in brackets, that's an explanation of the issue, then kill him. Okay, فَقْتُلُوهُ. So this is the hukm of the repeated offender in drinking alcohol. So he's given, first time, we know it's the ijtihad of Imam Ali radiallahu anh, that when he drinks, he makes an analogy, a qiyas, which we will study later on, with slander. Okay? So, in terms of the punishment, original punishment for drinking khamr, or taking khamr, it may not necessarily be drinking also, taking khamr, like even drugs today, it's the same thing, would be 80 lashes, because the way he deduced that, we will discuss it later on in more detail in the section of qiyas, but he linked it that, look, the one who is drunk, he is likely to say anything, and he can easily slander, right? He can easily slander anyone and say that you are a zaniya and this and that. And therefore the one who slanders without evidence is lashed 40 to 80 lashes, which is mentioned in the Quran. Therefore the one who is drunk, by analogy, should be lashed the same amount. So that's the original punishment for the one who drinks. But that, if he just drinks once, if he drinks again, then he's punished again, then the third time, then after the fourth time, on the fourth time, the Prophet ﷺ said, which was not initially there, but it was mentioned later, if he drinks the fourth time, then kill him. So here, that is because he is the punishment, of course, we can see it's been applied, he's carrying on, so therefore the rule is for him to be executed. Also, the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, I used to forbid you from storing away the sacrificial meat because of the large crowds. Now you may store it as you wish. So here Rasul Sallallahu mentioned that people used to initially store the meat which is intended for sacrifice. Okay, and because there was large crowds, Rasul Sallallahu here mentioned the reason. But then the Prophet ﷺ allowed that you can store it as you wish, i.e. there is no restriction. So the sacrificial meat, i.e. the meat, for example, we use in Eid al-Adha and all those things, we are allowed to store it, because there is no restriction now. The third point is the abrogation of Sunnah by Quran. Of course, the hukm of facing Al-Quds was not mentioned in the Quran, it is from the Sunnah. Okay, so the Sahaba were facing Jerusalem, they were facing Baytul Maqdis in the Sahaba because Rasulullah ﷺ used to face. But it was not initially in the Quran, so it is from the Sunnah. But that was abrogated from the Quran, from the ayah we have already discussed about turn your face in the direction of Masjid al-Haram. So that has abrogated the rule from the Sunnah. Also, there's an example of having intercourse at night was haram for the one who fasted during the day according to the Sunnah. So the Prophet ﷺ forbade the companions to do that, but that was abrogated by the ayah of Quran allowing that. Meaning, if you fast during the day, that rule does not apply. So Allah has permitted that. Another example, the fast of Ashura was established by the Sunnah but abrogated by the Quran with the obligation to fast in Ramadan. Similarly, it was allowed to delay the prayer in the thick of battle according to the Sunnah, and that is why Rasulullah ﷺ said on the day of Khandaq, after delaying the Salah, may Allah fill their graves with fire as they prevented him from praying the Salah. So here is an example. Initially there was an allowance to delay the prayer, and on the battle of Ahzab, the battle of Khandaq, because of the intensity, and people were shooting arrows and so on, and therefore it was difficult to pray the Salah, and they delayed it. It was allowed to delay it, and that was allowed from the Sunnah, because Rasulullah ﷺ by principle, he is ma'soom, so he is infallible, so whatever he does is the evidence. So if he allowed, it's impossible for him to commit a sin. So he allowed the Muslims to delay the salah. Here we have to put a cautionary note. The modernist camp of people who want to change Islam today, they use such evidences to breed corruption. So they say, see, the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because of difficulty, he changed the Sharia. So that's why they try to use these examples. Oh, see, you have to pray, even Salah, even in the battle, he left the Salah. They try to give an example to try and put a corruption, as if Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was disobeying Allah because of benefits, okay, because of some sort of worldly issues, of course, which is completely inconceivable for anyone to believe. That would nullify the entire deen, because it nullifies the Ismael or the infallibility of the Prophet, which that then means then the whole deen is in question, which is impossible, because the Quran we know definitively is from Allah. So here the Prophet allowed them to do that, but later on there was a Salatul Khawf, the Salah of fear, which was mentioned in the Quran. Okay, when you are among them and lead them in the Salah, it's talking about this specific issue. When you are in battle, there's a specific Salah which the Mujahideen pray. So that is with regards to the Kitab and Sunnah. Then we go on to talking about Ijma' and Qiyas. There are many examples of abrogation, like the abrogation of Sunnah by Quran. For example, the Prophet ﷺ did not forbid the companions from drinking khamr initially. So Hamza radiallahu anhu, he died in the battle of Uhud with alcohol in his stomach. It was not forbidden initially. Okay. Later on, when the ayah came, the ayah has forbidden it. So the abrogation of Sunnah by Quran, as an example. Similarly, the Prophet did not forbid the companions from gambling initially. As we know, the hadith about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and betting with the mushriks, and the Prophet even said, include me in the bet. It was not prohibited. Later on, the ayah came. So the Quran here again abrogated the Sunnah. Okay, it abrogated the earlier rules and it forbade the gambling. So similarly, we can say the khimar, the jilbab, all of these are similar examples. The Prophet did not forbid the women from not wearing the khimar or the jilbab initially, because these were not rules from the Sharia at the beginning. Later on, of course, the ayat of Quran came to abrogate that, right? So there are many examples. Actually, most of the examples that we find, a lot of them fall in this category. Okay, because when the rules were coming in the Quran, obviously they were abrogating what was previous and what was previously done. So the ayah about it is forbidden for a man to be married to the mushriks, or forbidden to marry the mushriks. I mentioned the example yesterday. Umar left two of his wives because immediately. So earlier it was allowed. So these were some other additional examples. The fourth point, it is not allowed to abrogate the hukum established by ijma'. This is because for a hukum to be established by ijma' means the hadith has not been narrated about it, even though the Sahaba knew the hadith but did not report it. They mentioned the hukum without narrating the hadith. So for a hukum to be established by ijma' means there is no text for it in the Kitab and Sunnah. Therefore there is no possibility for a text to abrogate the hukum established by ijma'. So here it goes into a subject which we're going to go into in more depth later on, which is the third source of Sharia, ijma' as-sahaba. Not any ijma' here, ijma' as-sahaba here we are talking about, which is a definitive source which is accepted. We're explaining that ijma' as-sahaba cannot be abrogated. Why? Because ijma' as-sahaba is an indication that the Sahaba consented to a matter. Because if something is clear in Kitab and Sunnah, the evidence is already there. Why do you go to ijma'? You only go to ijma' if there is no direct text, or even if the Sahaba sometimes conflict with the text and there is ijma'. Okay? Then the issue is that is the final say on the matter. There can't be an abrogation because there is no Quran or Sunnah after that. See the point? So ijma' al-sahaba is when the companions unanimously agree upon a matter, and that matter is not directly found in the Kitab or Sunnah, for example. Yeah? Sometimes ijma' can be used as a additional dalil already when there is a hukm in Quran and Sunnah, and some scholars they say Quran, Sunnah and ijma', everything is just to be comprehensive. But in principle, when does the mujtahid look to ijma' is if there is no direct text about it. So we'll give an example here. Few examples we can give. The issue of the death of Umar radiallahu anh, when he appointed 6 of the companions to appoint a Khalifa, to appoint